So yeah, welcome everybody. We're going to kick off. So if I haven't met you before, my name is Kirsty Miller and I'm the head of growth and strategy at DiUS. I wanted to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we're meeting here today. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people colleagues joining us today. So hello, everybody. I know I've said that about 8 times already, but thanks so much for joining us today over lunch. So for those of you who already know us here at DiUS, hello again. And for those of you who are new, a quick introduction about who we are and what we do. So who is DiUS? We're a technology consulting company that builds custom software and hardware solutions for clients. We have a unique and broad skill set that spans data, design, devices, and digital, making us the perfect choice for clients who are looking for product engineering services, but also those data-driven digital platforms, ML-powered products, or edge AI solutions that improve customer experiences or solve problems that haven't been solved before. So today, we're going to talk about that thing that is at the heart of the zeitgeist for those of us who work in the tech space right now. So that's developer productivity using Gen AI. And here to talk about it with me today, we have Darko, Zoroja, I hope I've said that right, Darko, and Godfrey. So I'll just do a quick introduction. No, I said it wrong, didn't I? Yeah, okay. He's smiling at me. Sorry. So Darko is a technology leader with a proven track record of leading high-performing teams to deliver high-quality, innovative solutions for enterprise of all sizes. He's got lots of experience in lots of industries, so health, ICT, media, resources, government, financial, and legal services. And currently, Darko is head of engineering at Jora. That's one of the world's largest free job posting sites. It's based out of Australia and forms part of the Seek Group. And we also have Warner, yes. So Warner Godfrey has more than 20 years experience in software development, consulting and leading teams across, again, many industries. He's currently the principal engineering lead for DiUS, and his wealth of experience and tendency to dig deep, those of you who know, they know, but Warner is going deep, serves him well both in his consulting work, but also his involvement with the DiUS's system of innovation, where as part of a group, he helps us identify and evaluate emerging technology and practices and their business impacts. So I think we've got 2 people here who are very, got a wealth of experience, and we're going to have a great conversation today. Another thing I wanted to let everybody know is that we really want to hear from everybody if you have questions that you would like answered. We're more than happy to answer them. We're taking questions today via the Slido. You can either scan the QR code on the screen, or you can go to slido.com and enter the code that you see on the screen. There'll be lots of time for questions at the end. So, developer productivity and Gen AI. We're going to get started now. It's our hope today that we have an interesting and highly practical discussion that benefits software developers and engineering leaders, and anybody who cares about, I guess, nurturing high-performing software development teams and is thinking about or has already used Gen AI tools to aid their software development efforts. So I guess there's so much out there in the industry right now, and I read this really interesting statistic the other day, which I think really typifies where we are at in the hype cycle for Gen AI. So Gartner released this forecast saying that over 80% of enterprises will have used Gen AI by 2026, up from less than 5% in 2023. That's a staggering rise from 5% to 80% in just 3 years. They don't specifically say software engineering, but it was centered around predictions for knowledge workers, of which obviously we that work in the tech space are a subset. So this area is so new and changing so rapidly. There's really not a lot of established best practice or guidance. And this can come with a lot of perceived risks that have been addressed by organizations in a range of different ways. So we wanted to start off with a quick poll. We wanted to gauge how many people on the call today are actually allowed to use Gen AI tools. Kavita, could you launch the first poll? Hope you can see that on your screen. And I hope everybody can go ahead and submit the answers. We'll just wait a little bit for the results to come in, and then we'll share them with everybody. Feel like we should have on hold music for this. Okay. I hope everybody is as interested in the results. That's really interesting. Oh, that's good. Okay. So my key takeaway from that, and I'm obviously interested in what Jora and Darko think, is that's really, really interesting because we read so much in the media about people having this blanket policy towards banning it, but it seems like a lot of organizations of which people are working for today, they've thought about it and people are using it. Do you guys have any comment on the results? Maybe Warner, if you want to go first.
Yeah, I think people are generally cautious about what they use within these tools naturally. So, and I guess we're going to see a lot more organisations putting some form of formal policy in place, but I guess we're probably in the early adopters, which we're trying to use it responsibly.
Yeah.
How about you, Darko?
Yeah, it's not a surprising result, and I want to add that one of the variants of yes, we're allowed to use it as we please is also yes, we're allowed to use it as we please because my company doesn't have policy on it, or they don't have a stance on it, and so I'd be really keen to know as well, like what that percentage might be too, but definitely like it's one of these things where this new tool has come in, it can make your job simpler and easier. So why not use it? And if nobody in your leadership is saying anything about it, then that's almost like an implicit permission to go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I think too, Darko. Like, I think that if there isn't a policy in this day and age, it is almost an implicit. You should be thinking about what your organization's policy is. And, if there are limitations, making sure they're clearly communicated. Okay, so I guess the first thing is people are using it. So how is Gen AI changing the way developers work? So Darko, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. So as I said, it's a new tool, right? And anything that can make your job easier or developers' jobs easier, that's going to be looked at very quickly and possibly adopted, right? Now, what's happened here with LLMs since they've exploded from OpenAI, obviously they were around before then, but OpenAI popularized them and brought them really into the public spotlight. But what's really happened is that there's been this sort of Cambrian explosion of innovation in this space. So you've got basically any dev or anyone who wants to tinker with it you can create your own from based off of a public LLM like Meta's Llama, and so there's been lots and lots of experimentation with it. The real question is about like how do you end up using it within the organization, and how do you actually leverage it to gain your productivity. I feel like this is really a situation similar to, and I'm showing my age now, when IntelliSense was introduced and popularized by Microsoft. Obviously, again, similar thing. It was, IntelliSense or variations of it existed before 1996, but when Microsoft first released that, there was a whole bunch of stances on this, right? From the very very sort of strict, almost like a manly sort of like, well, if you need to use IntelliSense, you don't know what you're doing, to the early adopters of well, this is actually a really powerful tool for us to use. And I think we're probably in that space at the moment with this as well. Maybe not so drastic because people can see the uses for it, and it's an extremely cool tool to have. But certainly we're in a period of unknown, right? These LLMs, they have emerging capabilities that we don't really fully understand yet. They're black boxes. And so there's still this exploratory period that we're in on how we're going to use them and how we can truly leverage them for the good of what we do.
Yeah, and I think your example's so interesting because I'm sure this wasn't like back in when IntelliSense was released, but I read a lot of stuff now about how it makes developers happier to be able to use Gen AI, and I certainly don't think that was something that was being discussed way back then. Yeah, it's like the things that we look at now are a bit different, for sure. What about you?
I think anything that removes friction from the development process is very quickly and adopted at a ground level. There's been heaps of discussions about tools that we've adopted in the past. IntelliSense was one of the main ones, but for me, debuggers were around probably when I first started programming. Incredibly powerful tool, but sometimes has a lot of friction to get started, so they're not used all the time, but still can make a huge impact. But front-end development and the introduction of Firebug and Chrome developer tools, similar sort of debugging capabilities, but the ease of use in the browser really meant that they were adopted quickly, easily, and without too much change in the process. And I think that's probably what we've seen with the introduction into these LLMs, into IDEs, that we're seeing a very quick uptake.
Yeah, and I think that it's really interesting too, just on how people use it. Everybody, like I talk to, seems to have their preferred thing that they use it for. If you are allowed to use it, they have their preferred thing that they like using. Usually it's Copilot X or it's ChatGPT, and they have very quickly worked out that this is a specific productivity hack, either for something they don't like to do. I know someone who said to me, "Oh, I don't like generating tables, so I use it just for that, and it just like really makes things go faster." Or people use it to figure out what possible approaches are. So is it like, would you say that it's like that in terms of developer productivity? It's sort of like quite an individual thing.
I would agree.
You're not
yeah. So there's different modes. Definitely the chat interface, and using Copilot X with the chat plugin is great for just, I've got something on my mind. I just want to, it's a question I might ask in an office environment, or if I had a pair sitting next to me. So just to get some input into whether I'm on the right track, versus the inline, I guess, prompting. So where I want it to actually do something specific. But yeah, I think I will always use the prompt or the autocomplete, because it feels like autocomplete on steroids, naturally. Not always taking the suggestion, but typically when I'm not programming, but I'm sitting back and trying to solve a problem in my head, I'm using the chat interface.
It's almost like a supercharged rubber ducky, right? Like,
yeah.
You guys know about the rubber ducky.
Yeah. We have DiUS Darko.
Yeah. So, there we go. But yeah, for those who don't know, the rubber ducky principle is, if you have a problem and you explain it to someone, even if it's an inanimate object like a rubber ducky, it makes it easier to solve that problem. And so your chat interface in Copilot X is almost exactly like that, which is you're explaining the problem. You're not only clarifying it to yourself because you're trying to explain it, but then you're also getting some feedback. And so it's a bit supercharged that way.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess just one more aspect I wanted to ask you guys about. So there is this theory out there that, using Gen AI for software development, it's actually better for more experienced consultants or software developers. Like, I don't know, maybe Darko, you can go first. Like, what's your opinion on that?
Oh, I absolutely agree. It's if you think about like your or a developer's career, when you first come out and you're still learning how to solve problems, and you're still learning how to work and what mode of work is best for yourself. Using a tool like ChatGPT, it's kind of like I ride motorbikes, by the way. You might be able to tell from the stereotype, but it's kind of like, I've just done my learners, right? And I'm going to hop on to a 1000cc monster Ducati or something. And the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to crash, right? Because you don't know how to use it. It's too much power. A similar thing could be said here, right? If you don't understand the code that it spits out, if you don't know how to describe the problem, if you don't know how to call it out on its BS, if it's like hallucinating or something, then you could go down the wrong way. You could form bad habits. And so while like in my teams, we don't really prevent anyone from using Copilot, but we do have it with a great big caveat of, you should still be pairing. You should be pairing with someone who's a bit more senior. You can learn from them. You can and you can learn how to use this tool in a more safe manner.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Warner, do you have anything to add to that? What do you reckon?
Yeah, well, I definitely don't. Yeah, it's definitely not a pair substitute. It's not pair programming. So I do fully advocate for working with a fellow human on those very tricky problems, especially. Yeah, I think the stats, I can't remember off the top of my head, but the number of suggestions that were accepted, and I guess almost if you were to drill it down to number of first suggestions which were accepted, if that's quite high, and junior programmers are taking the first suggestion without critiquing it or understanding it, that's going to be a bit of a problem. So I think what typically my personal experience has been that you're looking through the suggestions, you're taking something that suits the context in which the functional block is being written, and sometimes even just taking ideas, going, that's quite an interesting way of solving the problem. I might adapt a little bit of what they're suggesting with a style that suits what I'm working within. So yeah, it's not just blindly doing what the AI is telling me. But it can, I guess, on the flip side, it can expose people to a lot of different coding styles, which is good. I guess we're all doing a lot of code reviews. And I personally probably read more code than I write. So, and I actually do feel that actually helps, I guess, becoming a more well-rounded developer.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Okay, so it does help productivity. There are some caveats, right? But what are some of the things that you need to consider before introducing Gen AI to your team or perhaps your organization? Maybe Darko, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's always a balance, right? It's a balance of risk versus productivity, right? Like, is the productivity gains we're going to get from this? And I'm talking like from an organization level rather than a personal level of using it. Is the benefit of using these tools worth the potential risk? And so it's going to be up to the leaders to decide that, right? Like what is the risk profile that you're happy with versus the productivity. That's like probably the biggest consideration we had at Seek when we were deciding whether or not we're going to go through with it. The other one as well is that you know, what happens if you don't adopt, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you don't adopt and you've got this, and the developers have this like really cool shiny tool they want to use, right? Even if you're limiting, you know, installing those extensions or whatever on your machines, it's trivial to bypass those kind of things, right? And you know, I can copy paste it from another machine, right? I can do my work somewhere else and then just copy paste it into my work machine, right? It's that trivial, right? So if you're not considering and you're just saying we want to ban it, we're not going to use it, then you have to be prepared that you're just going to have an unknown risk in that case of someone using it. It only takes one person, right? You only need to look to Samsung and the breach that they had from OpenAI to understand that that's a bad policy. So there has to be, you have to form a stance as a leader. You have to give that guidance. And so it's not good enough to just say, no, too much risk. We're just going to go, no, it's all, we're not using it. So yeah, like considering those, considering the risks and considering what happens if you don't,
Yeah.
if you don't as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I think that people are always attracted to the new, and particularly Gen AI, more than anything I think we've seen before. People really just want to get their hands on and understand what it's going to deliver to them. And if you restrict it, they are going to find ways around it. What about you, Warner? What are some of the things that you would say? Because it's slightly different for us, right? Because we're in a consulting environment. What are some of the things that we need to consider?
Well, yeah, every client's going to have different policies. Every client's got different technology stack and operating environments. So I guess, you know, customer information is always front of mind. You know, and this is not a new thing. You know, API tools have often been a source of a leak with, you know, private information being put up on, you know, Postman or something like that. That happens. So I guess knowing that it's an external thing and what you're posting, you really are losing control over. Yeah. That's something which probably there needs to be better governance around that, you know, kind of like what we've got with pre-check-in tools with, you know, making sure that we're not committing secrets, or at least having some reactive type controls, like from GitHub, that will alert us straight away if we do something that was unintended. So yeah, I see there's a space for that to get better.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So if an organization is not thinking about considering Gen AI, but I think pretty much everybody already is, like when's a good time to start? I think, Darko, probably the answer from you is like right now. You should be doing it right now, and that's what we've discussed. Like yesterday, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But second best time is today.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Other than you know, risk, what is something that could prompt someone to I guess start using it or start considering it? Like, what are some of the drivers?
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was about to say, often new techniques normally picked up during pairing. You know, seeing how other people work and seeing, I guess, the benefits, and yeah, just adopting and trying those things out. Yeah, I love programming with someone who's also a Vim user, you know, because you learn a few little, you know, neat shortcuts. But I guess I haven't personally worked in that environment myself, but I can imagine, you know, the way that the prompts are phrased could be, you know, that's shared amongst your peers. I don't know. Okay, sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, no, not at all. Yeah, so with us, it was. I think curiosity is the first step, isn't it? It's the slippery slope that gets you in there, right?
Yeah.
My first exposure was I was having trouble trying to figure out what to put on a birthday card, and so I asked GPT to write it for me. And then all of a sudden, we've got a mob programming session at work to try and bypass our interview test.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that kind of curiosity, I think, obviously, as engineers, we all have that sort of healthy curiosity about new tech. That's what gets you in first, then they hook you, right?
Yeah.
With the results. And so I think in terms of like how you get in there, it'll start there, right? It'll start with that curiosity of this extremely cool tech that's come out. You know, straight after doing that interview session, by the way, when we were doing mob programming and we solved our assessment that was meant to last for a couple of hours, we solved it in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Without any human input, by the way.
Yeah.
Other than the prompts. I was straight into reading the white papers on you know, what backs these LLMs and how they work, and why while it might be a little bit above my IQ range, it was extremely interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that was the same for us, Warner. Like, you know, we're lucky enough to have machine learning specialists here at DiUS who are obviously, you know, forecasting what this might mean for us. But it was just like, until you could actually do it, I was like, oh yeah, GPT, you know, 3 model is coming, blah, blah, blah. But until you can actually use it, and for us, I think, I don't know, Warner, if you agree with this, like there was this kind of like this tipping point. We held like an internal session, like we regularly do, like one of our special interest groups, and it was hosted by a system innovation, Warner and I and myself, a couple of other individuals. And it was like the best attended session that we'd had in like such a long time. Everybody came, contributed. We had a great conversation. Everyone was sharing stories about what worked well for them and what didn't work well for them. And, you know, like, I mean, we knew, but then like that really just prompted a lot of more internal investigation. Would you say anything to add to that?
Yeah, I guess, you know, how people were using it was wide and varied, you know, whether it was learning a new language or whether it was to, you know, solve a problem in AWS or some unusual behavior and trying to get some ideas on how you might go and investigate it, which AWS used themselves from what I've heard. And so that was the really good thing from that session, is understanding that, you know, people weren't dismissive. They were trying it themselves. Not everyone's using it all the time. It's not, I guess, a lot of the hype is starting to talk about, you know, use it or you'll be left behind. And I don't know, I don't necessarily agree with that. You know, I still use print statements instead of debugging every so often, but you know, I feel ashamed of it, but it's just not worth the friction. And sometimes it's not. You know, you're actually within the flow of what you were doing, and you know, to the point we were talking about before with guardrails and, you know, safety and governance around the use of AI. Sneak has you know, a tool that actually complements Copilot, where it's actually checking the suggestions for security vulnerabilities. So it feels like you now got 3 people in the room while you're trying to program. Sometimes you just don't want the noise. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how much, I guess, distraction there could be from all the suggestions. And
that's the thing, right?
Yeah,
that's how I feel too. So obviously I'm not a software engineer, but I use generative AI all the time in my work to help you know, same thing, ideas, starting point to start me off, type in something, help me write something sometimes, but I'm always like, no, I don't like that. No, that's wrong. You know, it's just that constant feedback. Sometimes it's extremely helpful and sometimes it just doesn't get me anywhere. And I think it's very, you know, the context is important, the use of prompts is important, and the situation is really, really important. And what you're trying to achieve is really, really important. I've read a lot of things recently about how Gen AI is useful for ideation, but it can't help you, I guess, completely, how shall I say it, solve a kind of a fixed problem. It'll give you lots of ideas, but it's not gonna give you the solution.
Yeah, it's going to sit on the fence a lot of time.
It is.
Darko, I was wondering, with your experiment with the interview questions and the take-home exercises, I'd solved the problem. How did you feel about I guess some of the other non-functional characteristics of the code, like modularity and just the readability of the code? What any findings there?
Yeah, it was really interesting actually, because the goal for the group was, we're not going to write any code, right? We're only going to write prompts. So there's going to be no human input into the code, other than a prompt that might say, so for example, we have this, we had this one section where, you know, you're controlling a robot. Some of you probably would have heard about this toy robot test, right? And so you control the robot, you know, it can go left, right, turn, whatever, right? And we told it, you know, like, when you type turn right, it turns right, yeah? And it generated a whole bunch of magic strings for that, right? And then we told it, can you make the code cleaner and easier to read? And it was like, yeah, sure, okay, I'll just put in an enum instead. And so we used prompts to actually fix the code itself that it generated itself. So it was building on top of whatever it had before, and iterating on top of it. So we were just sitting there going, all right, can you fix that thing? I think you've got an error here. And it's like, sure, I'll do that for you. And it fixes you know, it might have been an off by one in an if statement, or it might have been, you know, this enum thing with magic strings or whatever. So it was quite, really quite impressive.
Nice.
So, which is, you know, I guess you still got to ask it to do those things. You know, it's not going to give you the,
absolutely, yeah,
you know, it's, you know, loosely coupled and, you know, well architected suggestion on the first hit. But, you know, I guess that's interesting.
Not always, yeah. Not always. It's a mixed bag, right? Some of the things are perfect straight out of the box, right? And that's where you know, when we're talking about that sort of junior versus senior thing, if you're a senior doing this, you can call it out and you can say,
yeah,
you can recognize an anti-pattern or the lack of a pattern there, and you can call out and say, hey, can you actually fix this and use this other thing, and it does it for you.
Okay, we wanted to ask another poll now. Like we've just talked about using Gen AI and what it delivers to you. So yeah, if you do use it, where are you seeing the biggest gains? Just to see what people think. Aha. Yeah. I'm not surprised by the biggest one, helping with routine, boring tasks. And we could only let them pick one. I think, you know, the answer really is people would use it across various things. Well, that's very interesting.
Writing change logs. Yeah.
No surprises for me there. I don't know, Darko, Warner, no surprises for you?
Not at all. We actually, so at Seek, when we were considering using Copilot, we went through a trial period. So my whole team of about 60 devs all got Copilot before anyone else in the org. and on the condition that we were gathering telemetry and there would be filling out a survey at the end, so that we can track, like whether this is actually helping or not. And I've got the results here in front of me, but some of the telemetry is super interesting. So in that trial period of 30 days, we had an acceptance rate of 24.4% of all the suggestions that were made, which translated to about 6,300 lines of code. Now, out of those, it's actually broken down into language as well. Of course, TypeScript, being one of the major languages that we use, was overrepresented, but the really interesting stat for me was that the highest rate of acceptance was for YAML at 51%, and for JSON next in line at 33%. And so that sort of corroborates with that, boring tasks that I don't really want to do, boilerplate, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's sorry, Warner?
I was about to say one of the great examples that I saw from a colleague that I used to work for is generating test data with some imaginative names. And I had a test user, surname better, and then created an array of test users and gave a whole bunch of Seattle musicians just off the bat.
Yeah, that's pretty.
Have a bit of fun while you're working.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, so we're actually getting a question through that's related to this, so I hope we're going to be able to answer about that. So, Darko, you guys went and actually did a pilot, because you wanted to investigate what was the impact going to be. You shared some interesting telemetry there, but it's this whole thing around productivity. Like, we very deliberately used productivity in the, I guess, the title of this Lunch and Learn, because people talk a lot about measuring productivity, and it can be really subjective, although not according to McKinsey. If you know, they released that article recently about, anyway, measuring productivity. So how are we going to measure or show increased productivity with Gen AI? Like, what did you guys look at, Darko, when you were doing your pilot?
So like originally it was just about, the qual and the quant, right? So we had the telemetry, we had the survey at the end. The survey was also super interesting to get some sort of snippets of information from people. It ended up that sort of 79% of people are extremely or very likely to recommend the continued use of Copilot. I have some statements here, actually. So like, I'm more productive when using Copilot. I spend less time searching for information or examples. I complete repetitive programming tasks faster. And then the themes are really just around that boilerplate tasks, assistance, getting a better jumping off point than a blank page, even if the suggestions aren't exactly right. And then one person in particular, which kind of resonated with me, not because I can relate, but because, we're always talking about inclusivity and diversity and inclusion, is one respondent actually said that they have a recent elbow injury, and that Copilot allowed them to stay more productive during that time because they could minimize their typing. And so that's on the sort of survey side and like what people are actually saying. One thing I want to note with that as well is that I think that what sometimes we don't consider is the impact of morale and happiness of our team on productivity. People that are happier and that get to do more interesting stuff more often will be more productive in general. And so using tools that give us joy, Marie Kondo, right? When it gives us the sparks joy, right? Then it'll make you happier. It'll free up your time to spend on the really interesting stuff. In terms of the actual, McKinsey, let's measure stuff. Let's be data-driven leaders, of course. There's the old school, right? How many lines of code did you write? Which is just a terrible measure. There's the sort of classic agile velocity, story points, how many cards have you moved, etc., which is not a terrible measure, but not always very useful either, because you can't compare apples to apples between teams. But what I found was that using something like the four metrics from DevOps, the State of DevOps report and the Accelerate book. So deployment frequency, mean time to recovery, change failure, change failure rate, and then lead time are the ones that actually indicate productivity for us the best. So if we're seeing more frequent deployments, if we're seeing less changes failing in production, if we're having to roll back less often, if we're getting code out to production more faster, that's all health metrics and indicators to me that the team is actually performing better. And so that's what we have seen. Yeah,
and I would plus one that a lot. I think Warner's nodding. He agrees. Warner?
100%. Yeah, I think those, team-based and outcome-based metrics are a good place to start. If you haven't put them in place already, that's probably something to look at. If you haven't started adopting infrastructure as code yet, and automated deployments, that's I guess it's be like start maybe focus less on the Gen AI part and more on some of the things that the Accelerate book is advocating and putting the metrics in place, and then use that as a baseline to any form of process or tooling improvement, as whether it moves the needle in the right direction or not. Through preparing for this, I also came up with Nicole Forsgren's paper on the SPACE framework for developer productivity. So she was also an author of the original of Accelerate and the original DevOps reports. So which go on to talk about more. It varies between the metrics that can be captured on an individual team or organization level, and but they're kind of all those metrics that you want to use with caution. There's things around productivity, activity, and collaboration. So they would be useful, but I don't know. In my opinion, the outcomes seem more important. And I guess there are so many things that contribute to that. It's going to be hard to attribute it to one particular thing, but that's probably the best we've got.
Yeah, I think, Warner, and one of the things that we really wanted to talk about today, which you guys already have, is that it's not all about Gen AI, right? It's not going to solve your problems. There's lots of other things that you need to consider before going straight to AI. And you just said it there yourself, creating a high-performing team. There's culture, there's ways of working, there are other tools. There's lots of different things that people should be considering before they add Gen AI into the mix, I think, is kind of a key takeaway. Okay. We also wanted to get opinion from the audience about what actual tools people have been using. Could you launch the next poll, please, Kavita? Yeah, lots there. I mean, you can pick more than one this time. And if you're like me, I didn't even know there were so many out there. Thanks to Warner for compiling the list. There's so many. It's going to become a very crowded space, I predict. Either that or you won't know you're using it. Anyway, one of the two. Not unexpected there. Yeah.
It's interesting to see we've got at least some participation across the board.
Yeah.
Tabby was the only one. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that, I don't know about you guys, but that certainly, I guess, is consistent with, our knowledge of the industry and which ones get the most airtime. I know that we have, our machine learning team have experimented with the performance and the results of a lot of the other LLMs out there. And I know that, I don't know if I should say this out loud, Warner, but OpenAI's API is kind of hard to beat. True or not?
It's definitely the gold standard, and yeah, the expectation has been set very high for end users. And when we're looking at developing models with different characteristics, or maybe there's an emphasis on keeping the data internal, it's kind of scrambling around the open source models, or way to train them to come into the same sort of ballpark as especially GPT-4.
Yeah. So I guess, I don't know, I'll ask you this, Darko. Given that there's so much dominance from, basically 3 kind of tools, like, are there any ones to avoid, in your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. This is all part of that risk conversation that we have. But before I start, I was just thinking I'd never use AWS Code Whisperer to write inference code. You never know what it's going to generate. Like, here, use this extra large instance and pay us more money. But yeah, on the risk, one thing I will always advocate for is do not use free stuff. When it comes to this, to LLMs, if it's free, it's being used to train. It's using your data to train itself. I mean, OpenAI does it. They're pretty transparent about it. But all of the other ones will do it as well. Now, what we've seen is people have, as I said earlier, anyone can spin up their own thing, right? Like, it could be, someone who's testing out an LLM against AWS documentation, for example, right? As what was mentioned. But what we've also seen is like a huge explosion of like extensions, right? Extensions that promise the world, here it's free, blah, 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 whatever. But it's actually just wrapping OpenAI or wrapping some other thing, and they're doing stuff with your data, right? I mean, you're the product to them. And so you never know when these extensions might have malicious code in them, when they might have been compromised, or if they're just using your data in bad faith or whatever. So we have a very strict, like, what we discovered through the process of vetting Copilot internally, and there was a number of reasons why we went with Copilot, but what we discovered through vetting it was that we have to restrict to Copilot. So we say, use Copilot, we're happy to pay for licenses, happy for everyone to use it, but don't use anything else, please.
Yeah. Because
if you install an extension that is promising you, free LLM, whatever capabilities of whatever sort, that could very easily be malware. It could be compromised in the future. It could be used to gather your data. You only have to look at plugins like Copilot, which we knowingly install, and we know that they look at the entirety of your IDE space. Everything, not only what's open on your screen, but anything that the IDE has access to, it will suck up in order to be able to make your suggestions. And so that's where that risk factor comes into it. We have an established relationship with GitHub. We have an established relationship with Microsoft. We have some pretty good contracts in there that, again, people above my pay grade have vetted. And so we're comfortable knowing that Copilot does this and has this feature and has this capability to do this, but also knowing that we're sort of contractually protected, and that the paid version of Copilot, for example, doesn't, it does look at all your data, but doesn't retain any of it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go to the free version of Copilot, let's say you got a version of Copilot that's based off of your open source contributions. So we had some people who were using it through that license. That that will take everything and it will send it back to OpenAI, train it there, and then, you know, it's only a matter of time before, you know, you have a Samsung situation in your hand.
Yeah, that's right. And I want to just ask one more, like 1.5 more questions, because and then we'll get to some of the great questions that have been coming through on Slido. And just a tip for everybody, if you we'll be taking the questions that have the most number of upvotes, so the most popular question wins. So if you know, please feel free to use the thumbs up button to get something you're interested in to the top of the list. Okay, so there's this really strong theme of risk coming through, and I want to ask you this. So there's obviously, you know, confidential data. There's also, you know, all the things we've talked about. But what about intellectual property? Like, what you know, that's a big can of worms. Like, can you comment on that? Generative AI, software development, and intellectual property.
I'll preface this with I'm not a lawyer. I remember looking at a few of these tools a little while ago, and I know that there was some thought, you know, there was some perceived risk around the legalities of using input from these LLMs as far as code. And I think with Copilot and the enterprise or paid editions, there is actually some clauses in there about how Microsoft will, you know, it's basically help fund your defense or defend on your behalf for those things. So I guess that takes away some of the fear of adopting these tools. I haven't looked at everyone's policies. But then you've got you know, making sure that you're retaining your own IP, and again, you know, using those paid enterprise versions that actually have by default, not only with Copilot but ChatGPT, having it the default with the submitting for training purposes turned off. Yeah, and having that at an enterprise level. I guess we're going to start to see that with Office 365 Copilot as well, when it's trawling all your internal documents.
Yeah, but I don't know. That's a good thing, Warner. I want that. Just help me write things and find things. But anyway, okay. Just one more question, and then we'll go to the other questions. So, Darko, this one's for you. Creating a safe space for experimentation. So you obviously did that with your pilot that you ran. You learned a bunch of stuff, you gathered a bunch of data, and now you've obviously got this policy. So what's your advice for someone who's like been listening today and they're like, okay, I'm going to go and trial this at my organization, and I want to set up a safe space for experimentation, to run a pilot, to do what you guys did?
Yeah, sure. It comes down to that balance of risk versus reward. Now, and just to address that comment in the chat as well, feel free to use free programs. Absolutely. It comes down, in our context, we hold millions of people's private information, and so we don't have the risk appetite to expose that to a malicious actor. But absolutely, like if you want to use a free program, that's on you. You just have to understand what you're getting yourself into. In terms of doing it safely, like if you are in a situation like what we are in, where we do have a lot of PII, where we are very, very conservative when it comes to risk, it's all about trialing it safely. And how can you do that? You find a team that isn't working on the most important thing, well, not most important, most sensitive thing, I suppose, and you can try it there, right? Not every team in every organization will be working with PII. Not every team in every organization will be working on some highly classified IP. There is always work out there, like fixing small bugs or creating, your standard, CRUD type applications where you can actually test this out safely without exposing yourself or exposing the organization to operational risk and security risk. And so, depending on your context, that's not what you might do. Otherwise, you can absolutely go and try out the free tools that are out there and see what fits you best, right? Just keeping in mind that it's incredibly important to understand how these tools function and what they do in the background, and that I wouldn't want to use a tool like this unless I understood that to the full extent that I can in the first place, because of obviously the law of unintended consequences, right?
Yeah, that's really good advice. Okay, question. Left us with 2 minutes, but I think some really great points and practical tips were there. So the two highest rated questions, one was about ROI and measurements, and I do actually believe that we've answered that. And someone's asked about a training specific to a workplace, or how GenAI is used to increase productivity. Not YouTube, more like here's how we do it here. And I think that you guys have said that it's like, yes, every organization should assess it, come up, test it, and then release a policy on like, this is how we do it here. Just like, Darko was saying, did the research and they're like, if you're going to do it, please use Copilot, and this is how we do it here. So I think the answer to that one is yes.
There's probably, I've been thinking a lot about how some of the studies by Boston Consulting, and there was one that was done by ANZ recently, and they didn't call that out explicitly, but actually making people aware of the features that are available to them, and how you can use the prompts, and where I guess that in the Boston Consulting article they started talking about the areas of competency, and training people on where you're going to get the best results, or where you're going to find you're going to get widely varying and possibly even hallucinated responses. So I think there's something to be said for that, and I guess the body of knowledge that's accumulated within an organization, or a team level, of helping people get started.
Awesome. Well, there was a really curly one, which was, will an AI end up writing all of the code? And if so, at what point will we not care about the quality of the code? But it's 1:30 and we have to close. So maybe,
as long as a human writes the tests.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Look, thank you everybody for joining us. We could have talked for so long on this, and thank you so much to Darko and Warner. It's just been such an insightful, interesting conversation, and I really thank you for all the insight you shared today. And thank you to everybody in the audience for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you listen into our conversation today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.